Hello, everybody. Dan Turbyville here, and welcome to Powerhouse Fence Show. I am I'm happy. I'm thrilled that everyone who's listening to this thing right now takes time out of their day to listen to me ramble on about whatever I'm rambling about. So thank you. Oh man, sound effects. So I'm trying to learn what all these little buttons over here do, so I'm getting there. But anyway, today the topic of the show is, did I mess this up? And so I'm going to go through a situation that's unfolded over the past few weeks here at Memphis Fence Company. I'm going to tell you what I did, and we're going to see if I handled it the right way or not. I don't know if it cost us, if it hurt our odds in selling a job. I don't know if it hurt us in any relationships or if we handled it the right way and everything's going to be fine. Time will tell, but I'm going to share the story, and I am curious to know other people's opinions. Yeah, like I said, I can tell you what we did, and we'll see what you think. So we're still doing our in the description. There's a link for our Make a Wish fundraiser. That's still going on. So if you want to click the link and donate anything, feel free to do so. We also have a couple other links in there. One of them is the Thornton Fence Consulting Group's events, and the last is the Memphis Tri-State Fence Association golf tournament that actually is like starting tomorrow. If you're listening to me live, and so I don't know if it's too late to sign up or not, but you might not be able to play golf, but you could come there and hang out and meet some folks if you wanted to. Alaria just joined here. Hopefully, there's no problem. Anyway, so our partners are, well, we're sponsored by Memphis Fence Company, MFC Manufacturing, and Simpalo. And we have a few partners listed up over my head right now. I mentioned the Thornton Fence Consulting Group. I think they also are the Thornton Business Consulting Group now. But anyway, they're listed up there, and I have some. Oh my goodness, what am I doing? All right, so sorry. They they do a lot of training and consulting. They have an array of different things that you could sign up for, right? So it's a lot about efficiency and profitability, but they also do training for fence installation and different things like that as well. And they have different packages, right? Some of it's on site, some of it's all done through Zoom. They do host events periodically throughout the course of the year. Definitely suggest some of those. Fence News is our next partner. So, uh, fence industry publication, and it is still on paper. So if you're into that thing and want to spread it out like a big newspaper, that's cool. I like the folks there. I like what they do. If you want to stay up to date on all the latest trends and products and news and things like that, you don't want to miss it. And then EZG Manufacturing. So you've seen the big orange machines at different trade shows. That is them. So they make some dispensers for chain link, barbed wire, field fence, things like that. Concrete hopper or dispenser. They make concrete mixers. All this stuff is to be attached on various size skid steers. So check them out. All right. So we made it. We are live. Yeah, there's a phone number on the bottom of the screen. If you want to call, you can. Feel free to do so, and I'll do my best to put you here on the air. So I like to talk about the things that I'm listening to, right? And I so the thing I want to say about that is not necessarily about a thing that I was listening to, but about a recurring theme that I hear a lot. And I mentioned this last time, I think. Maybe I've mentioned it multiple times, but one of the recurring themes that I see a lot is to hire the absolute best of the best no matter what. There was a story that was told about a guy. I think he was the like founder of Citadel, and Enron, when they announced that they were going under, he got on a plane and flew there and interviewed like everyone in the building that day. I mean, that's absolutely insane, but he understood the value and the importance of capturing the best talent that he could find, and he thought that was a way to make that happen. So again, got on a plane that day. It's crazy. So do the thing that you're the absolute best at. is another recurring theme that I hear a lot. So I heard an interesting story about the guy that founded Red Bull, or one of the guys. I think they were partners. And they decided early on that they were actually a marketing company or a marketing conglomerate. And so they outsourced everything else to do with their company and they just solely focused on the marketing side of it. And like they bootstrapped this thing. So I think both of them put in $500,000 and then they got like a little loan or something. But it wasn't like they had any giant investors or any of that kind of stuff. And so they did that and then they grew it into what is today a 50 or 60 billion dollar company because they focused on the thing that they were really, really, really good at. Or in Speed of Trust by Stephen M.R. Covey, I think what he says is your core business should be one thing that you can be the absolute best in the world at. Okay. So not really good at, not kind of good at, not good at, the absolute best in the world. And I believe he even goes on to say that if your core business is something that you cannot be the absolute best in the world at, change your core business. So, anyway, not really a specific thing that I've been listening to or reading or any of that, but kind of, like I said, just a recurring theme. Those two things I seem to hear a lot. So, as always, I want to thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. It's really cool. And it's an honor that people would take time out of their day to sit and listen to this. And I try my best to deliver meaningful content in return. Right. So, I'm trying to give you something worth your time. Right. So, I do appreciate you all being here. If you are so inclined, you can, I don't know, give us a thumbs up or a rating or I don't share like something like that and maybe share it with somebody who could benefit from whatever the topic of the day is. And if you want to hear something specific, if you want to be a guest on the show, if you want to see somebody be a guest on the show, let us know, and we're going to do our best to make that happen. All right, now, so let's get into the story, and let's talk about the thing that I may or may not have messed up. I don't know. Time will certainly tell, but I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning and retell this story as well as I can. I don't. I think I have a pretty good memory of everything that happened, so hopefully I don't leave it all out. And I genuinely do not know if I did this the right way or not. So I'm going to share this, and again, without understanding if this is proper or not. So this job that I'm going to talk about, it does have an NDA, so hopefully I don't think I'm violating that by talking about a job, right? But there's not going to be any specifics, no project location or name or, nobody's names are going to be in here. So a couple months ago, I was talking to a guy and he didn't call me for this specific thing, but we were on the phone, we were chatting, and he made mention of him having heard about a job that was coming. And he says, he kind of describes like some of the quantities and things like that he had heard about this job. And he just kind of asked me, like, hey, man, would you look at this job and help me? Either, maybe we go into it as a partnership or, maybe I could just use some advice when bidding it, whatever that was. Right. And so I said, yeah, sure. I'd be happy to look at it and, see if I could share any experience with you on that job. So that was kind of the very beginning of the story, right? And so, as always, I'm happy to talk to people and have conversations. In fact, I started this show late today because I got tied up on a conversation leading up to this, and I enjoyed the conversation. Always welcome it, so I'm not complaining about it. But like I said, I am open to it, and that's what was going on. So then some time goes by, right? And I mean, nothing ever happened with it. I never heard anything back from him on this job, and I get a phone call from a general contractor, and he says he wanted to talk to me about a job, and he couldn't tell me what the job was or anything else, but he kind of described some of the scope of work, the size of the project, things like that. And he just asked if it would be something I'm interested in looking at. And so, of course, I always tell people I'm too stupid to say no. So I said, yes, I'll be happy to look at it. And so he says, all right, well, I'm going out of town. He said, when I get back, I'll send you an NDA that I'm going to need you to sign before I can talk to you about really anything specific and before we can actually like start getting into the details of the job or anything. And so the next week went by, the following week came and I never heard anything. So I reached out and I was like, hey, I never heard anything back. And I never heard anything back to that when I reached out. And so I was like, all right, well, that sucks. But hey, maybe somebody else took care of him and got him what he needed and just kind of moved on. Well, then it wasn't too long after that that someone else in the office, it wasn't me, got a request for a material quote. So we do sell material. We do like wholesale to people who are going to install larger projects from time to time. And we do retail stuff to, people that are homeowners and DIY kind of people and everyone in between that. And so this person reached out to us. They had bought material from us before, and they went back to the same sales rep that they had dealt with the time before on that material job. And so I didn't know anything about it. I mean, people here do their thing, and like I don't know about everything that they look at and everything that they touch. I learned later that they were asking for some sort of like high security fence, maybe some anti-climb stuff or whatever, and it was a pretty good quantity of it. And so, there were some conversations that the sales rep brought to me after the fact, just because of the nature of the project. And so, we talked about it a little bit and things like that. And so, next thing you know, I get an email from an owner's representative, we'll call them, and they're wanting to. They kind of just said, "Hey, we need a price on some fence. Would you want to give us a price on it?" And I said, "Well, I mean, can you tell me anything about what it is?" And it was kind of like, "Well, not really." Okay, well, yeah, I guess, right? I think so. And man, I so when I was on the way down here, I dropped something and I like knelt down to get it, and when I did, my knee hit the ground, and it just so happened to be like on the threshold of the carpet in my office, and one of the nails from the carpet went right in my knee. Sorry. So this guy, was super vague about what they were wanting and everything. And he says, hey, we have an NDA. We need to get that signed, all of this stuff. So he sent the NDA that same day. And, I got that signed and submitted and everything. And then we met on site the next day to look at what they were wanting to do. And so they didn't really have any specific details, right? It wasn't like, hey, we need you to buy a fence from this manufacturer. It wasn't, even like, here's where we want gates. There just wasn't very much information. They didn't even know the exact layout. Like we met for a while, and during that thing, I think the layout of the fence changed 2 or 3 different times before we finally left with an understanding of a layout, which then changed again the next day. But anyway, so there's not like a plan set like you normally would have. We did have a site plan, and the site plan showed a fence line on it, but again, that wasn't even really like set in stone, right? Because it kind of bounced around all over the place. There were extra gates that they wanted to add into places, and like we talked through all of that stuff with them. And so when we were on site, we looked at the site. We First of all, I want to understand what you're trying to accomplish with the fence. So that was whenever I talk to people in I did it a lot in the residential world. I don't have the exposure and the opportunity to have these conversations so much anymore. But that would always be one of the things I would ask them as well. What do you want your fence to do for you? Right? Instead of like, what type of fence do you want? I would always ask them, what do you want to accomplish with this fence? Do you want it for security, privacy? Are you marking a boundary? What are you trying to accomplish? And so we had those same conversations with them out there. And so we kind of got a feel for what they were trying to accomplish. And we were able to say, hey, why don't we put these gates here, do this with these gates, do this in this area, things like that. And so we left there with a pretty decent understanding. Now, at some point during this meeting, we were given a drawing, and again, that was the site plan that showed an idea of where the fence was going to go. And it just so happened that our sales rep, who had been talking to the material customer, was also there with me, and he goes, "Oh, I recognize this." And so we found out then it was the same job that we had been asked to quote material on. And so we were open with the owner's rep and all of that stuff when we were there. And we were like, hey, we've already been asked to quote material on this by somebody else. And we let them know. And so the thing about that was the scope of work was different. It wasn't like the thing that we had been requested to bid on this material quote was different than what we had been requested to bid when we were on site. And the gates weren't the same. I think they had like a turnstile in theirs, which we didn't talk about when we were on site. So there was quite a few discrepancies between the two things. And so this is really when the problem for me started. So turns out that the guy that I just so happened to have a conversation with a few months ago, he was talking about the same job. The general contractor that had reached out and then disappeared was talking about the same job. The material customer was talking about the same job. And now the owner's rep, all of these people, it's the same job. And so we didn't know it before, right? We kind of pieced it all together, especially when we got the drawing. In fact, we were out there and our sales rep was like, "Hey, let me show you this drawing." And I was like, "No, no, 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 no. We're not showing them that drawing that you received from somebody else until we know for sure it's the same site." And then when they presented the drawing, we saw it was the same site. Um, yeah, so this is kind of where the tricky spot started for me. And it was like, okay, so it's an NDA job, kind of a tricky thing anyway, right? Like, I don't really know how to move forward. I do know that we had spent several hours out on this job site. And during these several hours, we were able to come up with a layout and gates and all of these things that were going to serve the purpose that they wanted. But we did that because we've spent years in this industry. I mean, if you've listened to the show and know my story at all, you know I've spent my lifetime in this industry, and we're able to rely on all of that experience in order to come up with a solution that's going to fit their needs. Now, that is kind of one of the points that I was hung up on, right? Is like, okay, we applied our experience into fitting these needs and making this happen. So now we know it's the material quote and the install quote from two different people are the same thing. And again, this is when I started getting pretty uncomfortable, right? And so a few days later, we bid the installation stuff to the owner's rep the way that we had talked about doing it on site. I think we met on site on a Monday and we gave them the price on Friday, right? So it basically took that whole week to gather all of the different parts and pieces. If you don't know, when you get into some of these jobs that are these more complex, high security type of jobs, it's not like you can just go, well, I mean, maybe some of the suppliers out there will, but for us, it's not like we can just go to one supplier and we can check all the boxes that we need. So I have to go, I don't know, there was maybe 3 or 4 different people that I got prices on. I explored 2 different options for manufacturers. I mean, it takes a pretty decent bit of work to bid something like this. And so, like I said, over the course of that week, I was able to get it done. I think I actually sent it to him at like 11:30 or something on Friday night, just because I wanted to get it off my plate. And so I worked late and got it done and said, "Here you go." Now, during all of this time, our other sales rep here in our office, well, he's still working on quoting the material. And when he's trying to quote this material, it's still so messed up, right? Because the scope of work doesn't match. There's a lot of unanswered questions on the material side of it. There's a lot of missing information. There's a lot of things that they just don't know how to gather this information, and they don't really know what to tell us. And I don't blame them for that, right? Like they've not spent their lifetime in the fence industry. They're not even a fence company. And so I get that there's a lot of stuff that they don't know. But the tricky thing for me was I told the sales rep at the time, I said, "Man, I want you to treat it like it's a completely separate job, right? Don't let the information that we gained and the stuff that they told us directly dictate what you do with this material customer, because we don't want to be in a situation where we deliver what we thought the end user wanted, and the customer who's asking for a material price had a different understanding or different expectations or different conversations, right? So that's how the thing is really tricky to me, is I don't know what information to use. And so I'm trying to my best to be as unbiased as possible and give both people what they're asking for. And so I call this owner rep And, I followed up with him like, "Hey, I wanna see how the price looked, you got it." Went over a few things, like some of the details and stuff like that with them. And during the phone call, man, I even told him, I was like, "Look, we've got these other people, they've asked us for a quote on the material, and the information is different, and I don't like it." And I told him, I was like, "Man, it's put me in a spot that's pretty uncomfortable for me." And so there was no real solution for it, though. It wasn't like, "Oh, well, just, tell them that you already know what we want and quote them that, or just quote them what they're asking for." Or uh, there really was no solution, and so I still didn't know what to do. But during that phone call, I made a suggestion to him. I said, "Hey, what if we did this? What if we prepared like a design intent package? Okay, we can mark up your site plan if you want. We can at least put together like a set of specs and details, so that way this is the fence that we want to install. These are the gates that we want to install. Here's where we want them. Like, try to get at least some of that basic information to where at least the people are on the same page, right?" And I offered to do it for him. So I can do design work with Simpalo, with that company, and so like it wouldn't even be them hiring a fence company, right? So they would have hired Simpalo to do it. But the response I got from that is like, "Well, let me run it up the flagpole and see what happens." And of course, I never heard anything back about that either. Um, so here we are, still don't really know what to do, right? Oh, whenever I was offering to do the design work, I was like, "Man, we can even go out and we can hire someone to do a quote legitimate threat analysis." I don't know if the word legitimate fits there or not, but do like a threat analysis on it, right? So they can look at it and they can do calculations and see, okay, if the vehicle weighs this much, it can achieve some speed between here and here. And here's what kind of defense you need, what kind of crash rating you need to prepare for that vehicle running into the fence. And then, they might run that with like 3 or 4 different size of vehicles, and they'll plot out like the course that the vehicle would take and all this. Like it's a pretty thorough thing that they do. And so I was like, "Man, we can involve them," because when I asked them about the crash rated stuff, they're like, "Oh, I don't know." Well, what crash rating do you need? And again, if you're not familiar with that world, there's a whole array of different crash ratings, and there's even different systems that are used for crash ratings. And oh man, that's a whole pain, right? Because it's not like I don't want to sound like I'm complaining and saying, "Oh, it's difficult to do." Win win. Well, it's not. It's not difficult to do. The difficult thing is to design a project and make sure that you have all the material and understand what you're getting into when you're bidding it. For instance, if you have cables for the crash rated part, right? So some systems you might put the bollards for these cables might be every 40 feet, let's just say. And so you're allowed, maybe on this system, you can go anywhere from like 22 to 40 feet. Okay, well, then you go to another system and it's like, oh, they're every 60 feet and you're only allowed plus or minus 10%. And so you can imagine if you have, like, if let's say it's got to be 60 feet, right? So now if you have a 40-foot area, like, how do you do that, right? So now you have to like add bollards and stuff in there to back it up in order to actually achieve the crash rating. So that's where I'm saying things get a little bit tricky. And I haven't found a good source for that information without going back and forth with suppliers and manufacturers and all of this to try to come up with a system that actually works. Um, I will also throw in a little tidbit of information about whenever I bid these jobs that I do have NDAs on and stuff. You can't just send them the plans, right? Because you signed an NDA that you wouldn't disclose any specifics about the job. So like you can't tell them who it's for, where it is, you can't send them the drawings, you can't send them any of that stuff. And so what I'll do is I'll recreate a drawing on a piece of paper or in Simpalo or whatever that gets the point across and shows them the links of all the sections and all of this stuff and send them that. And so again, kind of the complexity of bidding the jobs and the time that it takes. And to reinforce the fact that I'm not trying to cry about this is I really enjoy it. Like I like doing that. I like doing things that make me really have to think about them. I could probably bid 6 foot tall chain link jobs in my sleep. And like that, they're, yeah, you're doing work and like I'm accomplishing the thing and we sell the jobs and like we get paid. But it's nice to have a challenge every now and then and have something that really makes you think about it. And so that was this thing for me, right? And I've bid several of these. They've all been pretty enjoyable. If you've listened to my show before, you know that I want to bid a job in an active war zone, not because I want to sell it, just because I want to go through the exercise of realizing what it would take to do the job. And I want to think through all the logistics and everything else. Uh, but that's neither here nor there. So offered to help them with design work, offered to help them with the threat analysis, offered to do all of this stuff simply to get everybody on the same page. I said, man, it's really messed up that you've got multiple people submitting bids on this thing. There's not any design, there's not any drawings, nobody knows what to do. And so I said, I think it would be worthwhile for us to like pause for just a minute and look at design and make sure that what we're proposing is all similar or the same, ideally, and make sure that we understand what crash rating you need and what you need here and there and what gates you need and all of this stuff, right? Okay, so remember, the other sales rep is still working on the material price here in our office. And so he winds up and he sends them a material price, and it was fairly similar to what we did on site. The job, the request that initially went out for material, like when we sent it to the manufacturers, it was taking way too long to get. It was some custom made thing that was overly complicated. And so he was able to go back and forth with the material customer, and they were able to come up with a different design that wasn't a stock thing, but it was a lot more obtainable, right? So it wasn't some crazy custom fence system. And so when he went back and redesigned it, he was able to give him a quote for the material. And so he sent that earlier this week. I have to drink some tea, so hold on. Okay, sorry. So he sent that earlier this week, and they immediately responded to him and said, "Hey, can you give us a price for installing it?" And now, so now it gets even worse for me, right? And now I'm just super skeptical, and I'm like, okay, we sent them a price for this material. They immediately asked for an install price. Why do they want that install price? Do they want to know how much they can charge to do the job? Or do they actually want us to like give them a bid for doing the job ourselves? Because to me, those things are two completely different situations, right? And on the one where they want to know what to charge, like I can have really generic conversations about that and, maybe say, hey, I think it's going to take this long to install it, right? And just kind of try to leave it as vague as possible. If they actually want us to quote installing it, well, now I have to rebid the job. Because remember, I've already bid it once and submitted it to the owner's rep. And oh, well, it turns out, remember that GC that called me and then I never heard back from him? So the owner's rep said we would actually be working for them, but they were trying to help source the job. Anyway, it's just all messy. But yeah, so they wanted a price on the install, right? And I don't know if this is so they can figure out how much to charge. I don't know if this is because they're considering actually hiring us. I don't know what their motivation is. So I tell the sales rep in our office, I said, call them and ask them, right? Instead of us like guessing, speculating, instead of us playing this whole game of what are they going to do? Oh man, let's just call them up and ask them. And so that's what he did. He picked up the phone and he called him and he came back and he said, look, the guy sounds pretty genuine. He said they don't have the workforce, they don't have the people to get the job done, and they actually want a price on us to install it. So, okay, cool. And so we start working on that. And I go home last night and I pull it all up and I sit there and I fiddle with it. And I don't know. I went to bed at I frequently go to bed at midnight. And a lot of that is me sitting in my office at home until 11, 12 o'clock, whatever. I won't say frequently, but probably 4 or 5 times a month, whatever. I'll sit in the office at home until pretty late hours trying to get some things like this done. And so what I found when I was looking at it last night, I was like, man, this is really close to the thing that we already bid. It's closer than what I understood it to be, but it's not exactly the same. And so I kind of started comparing all the differences, right? And I'm like, all right, this is the labor that I thought it would take to do it our way. Now, how can I convert that over and like how much more or less labor do I think it's going to take to do it their way? And how much more or less complicated is it going to be now that there's an owner, a general contractor, a subcontractor, and then us? And so, then I'm kind of like, man, is it going to be a pain in the butt to get paid? Right. Because that money has to flow through all of these hands before it finally gets down to us. And I mean, these are big jobs that we're talking about, right? It's not a thing where it's like, oh, we missed a bill. Like, I'll just float the material cost for a month or two until we get paid back. Like, this is a thing where we don't pay the material bill and like it causes big issues. So, yeah, so that gives me anxiety about the thing. The fact that we're all on different pages gives me anxiety. All of this stuff, man. It's just a mess. So anyway, I was working last night trying to compare all of this stuff, and finally I just got to the point where I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna just bid it the way that we bid it when we went out on site. And what's my risk? My risk is that they now they they know what we bid, right? And so in my mind, I'm like, well, even if they know what we bid and we quoted them the material for that, they're still going to buy the material from us, hopefully. And if they buy the material from us, well, then we still make money, hopefully. And so I kind of just got to the point where I was like, man, what does it hurt, right? And that actually happened kind of a little bit last night and then more today. And so I'm sitting here talking to our guy in the office and I said, let me just call him. Let me call your customer. And so we call him up and I say, hey, look, oh, I'm just going to rip the band aid off, right? We already bid this thing. I said, we bid it directly to them already. We went out, we met on site, we walked the site, we looked at the plans, we did that whole thing. And we came up with a solution that we felt like would do what they wanted. We presented it to them. They felt like it would do what they wanted. And that's what we bid. I said, what if I just send you the proposal? Right? If it needs to run through you, okay, but I want to get paid the same. And so I did. I sent it to him. And I didn't enjoy it. And I still don't enjoy it. And as I sit here in front of you right now, I don't know if I did the right thing or not. Because now this person who started off by asking us for a material price now knows the material that how much we would charge them for the material, right? But then they also know how much we would charge for install. And so all they have to do is beat us by 3% and they're going to get the job. And, hopefully they would buy the material from us, but that's also not a guaranteed thing. And I hope it wasn't just like some giant long con. The job, it's a pretty decent sized fence job. And I mean, to some people, maybe it would be worth all of that, right? But here we are putting our faith in humanity, putting our trust in humanity. And I sent it to him. And I still don't know if I screwed it up, right? On one hand, I kind of think that I did screw it up. And I think that I put myself in a really weird position by sending them that proposal. And But at the same time, I think about it, and like I said, even if they sell the job and we sell the material, hey, we still did that. And I don't know I don't know how I could have done it better. I don't know what would have been all of that stuff because I expressed concerns to everyone and nobody shared those concerns with me and nobody presented me with a good solution to do it. And so, I kind of felt like it just landed on me and I had to make a call and that was the call I made. So, hopefully it works out. And if anybody has any suggestions or anything about how you would have handled that situation, I definitely would be open to hear that. And it was unique, right? And it was a long time of building up to this thing. Like I said, the first time I talked to somebody about the job was months ago. And turns out they're not in to my knowledge, they're not involved in the project. I never heard anything else from them about it. But anyway, it's all done. at to this point, right? And I don't know what tomorrow holds, but so far we've done what we could do. And that's the story. So that was a pretty short episode. I will tell you, if you have not joined into oh, Isaac Allen. Oh, wait a minute. There's comments. So Craig Eubanks, Fence Guy Friday, put some laughy faces in here earlier. Maybe he was laughing about me drinking tea. And then Isaac Alexander says, "Good afternoon. Thanks for stopping by, sir. You'll have to go back and listen to the story because it's done now, if you're curious. But I do appreciate you being here." So it's a very common thing having having no specs or details. What a nightmare. Yes. Yes, it is. And I mean, I was talking to a guy about that exact situation on another project that wasn't this convoluted mess. And I was like, man, welcome to the world of bidding fence, right? It's just what we deal with. We have a little bit of information. Okay. Isaac says he's been listening. I got you. Sorry. Uh, I mean, it's just the world we live in. Like I said, we get a little bit of information. We don't quite get what we need, but most of the time we get enough and we just kind of fill in the blanks. And again, it goes back to that whole what is the intention of the fence, right? And so when I bid a job, I try to look at what the intention is. We bid a job earlier this week and it was 2 tennis courts. And when they sent out this bid package, it says, hey, we want you to replace these 6 or 8 posts. And the rest of the post on these 2 tennis courts, we want you to pull all the fence off of them. We want you to clean them, prime them, and paint them. And I said, man, first of all, old galvanized isn't like that's going to be a pain in the butt to try to get some paint on that's going to work. And so I said, no, we're not going to do that. What we'll do is we'll give them a price to just take the whole thing out and replace it. That way we know it's a product we can stand behind. I wouldn't be happy if somebody called me in 3 weeks or in 3 months or whatever and said, hey, you know, those posts you painted, that's all fallen off. Right. So yeah, it's that was a thing that I didn't want to do, right? But that was kind of a similar situation. It wasn't that there really wasn't the information. Well, there wasn't any information. They didn't tell you any of the specs on the material at all. But it also was I just disagreed with the way that they asked us to bid the job, and I did it the way I felt like was right because I thought that I understood their intention. And so we do a lot of that, right? We try to understand intention and we try to bid the way that we think it should be in order for it to be done properly. And I think I've said this before. I believe that cost me jobs. I believe that we don't sell some jobs because we take that path. And we probably bid more than maybe we bid more than what somebody else does, right? And maybe we bid heavier pipe or whatever because we look at it. This tennis court, I know I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit, but the way that they actually did tell us the size of the post that they wanted on there. Now I do remember that. But the way that it was the size of all the pipe on there, they had like a 9 or 10 foot tall fence on there and they wanted 2 inch posts, 2 inch line posts. And I said, no, we're not doing it. Right. And so there you go. We overbid what they were asking for because we understood the intention. We understood the way that we believe the fence needs to be installed. And we bid it the way that we thought was right. But yeah, I think that cost us jobs. So Isaac says the great thing about this is they can't hold you to any spec or information that hasn't been provided to you. Yeah, yeah, that's true. Unless you go put but see, that's kind of the thing about that is like you go and you turn in submittals or you go start installing and they're like, "Oh, that's not what we wanted." Right? And so I kind of prefer all the information to be there on the front end. And I prefer that it be thorough enough that it gets people bidding apples to apples. That's the ideal thing for me. You know, it happens sometimes and it doesn't sometimes. Well, probably it happens, yeah, sometimes. Let's see. Craig says, that's crazy. But like you said, hopefully you make money one way or the other. Yeah. So back to the whole do we install it? Do we sell material? I agree, man. Hopefully it works out one way or the other. And he confirmed, yes, it was the T sound. Speaking of T sound, here we go. All right. it's easy when you have a guest, man. Like you can talk for a minute and then the guest can talk for a minute and you can take a sip of whatever while the guest is talking and stuff. But when it's you just monologuing, it's kind of hard to sneak a drink in or something here and there. Let's see. Isaac says, I would prefer that as well, but we usually only get that 50% of the time. Yep. Yeah, and that's the cool thing about it is as I've talked to more people and kind of grown my network geographically, I've realized we all fight that fight. Right? It's not anything that's specific to any one location, and I don't know, maybe there's areas that are better and worse, but I mean, we all fight that fight. So it's it's consistent, and I had a really cool opportunity, and I hope that this guy will come on the show and be a guest. But I was doing some training for Simpalo with a couple guys the other day. It was a father and son, and the father had recently retired. He spent something like 40 years as a general contractor, and he retired and came to work with his son at his fence company. And a part of his job on the beginning was to implement Simpalo and get them running on that. And so I got a little opportunity to maybe get, a different perspective or maybe to just vent a little bit or whatever it was. And I was like, hey, you know what I'm excited about? I'm excited about, 2, 3, 6 months into you learning the fence world. And you have a moment of realization and you think back on the times that fence contractors have called and asked you questions and you go, man, I didn't realize that they actually needed more information than was in the plans. I like telling the story of whenever I started down the path with Simpalo, I sent an Excel spreadsheet to the developers, and this Excel spreadsheet had a lot of different options on there for chain link. And the guy calls me up and he says, "Man, are you crazy?" I was like, "Well, what do you mean? Why would I be crazy?" And he said, there's something like 13 or 15 million possible combinations on this spreadsheet I sent, or the spreadsheet you sent." And I said, "Okay, well, let's start with that." And I'm sure I left some things off, right? And so I think anybody outside the fence world, I think as far as like the complexity and the variety of different specs that exist, I think they kind of underestimate that. And I've experienced that with hiring people to, for estimator project manager roles. I've experienced the whole, give me a few weeks and I'll be up to speed. And I'm like, man, don't be disappointed if you're not, right? Like if you do, great. That's awesome. But don't be disappointed if it really takes you about 6 months to fully understand all the different pipe sizes and thicknesses and everything. Not to even mention the fact that we use a whole different pipe sizing method than the rest of the steel world. And so that's another lesson to learn, right? Is when you look at a job and it says an inch and a quarter schedule 40 top rail, and you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't exist. Well, they're talking about the inside diameter, right? Um, and so yeah, we are a unique world. And I'm sure other people deal with similar things where they don't get enough information and they're always asking for more, and it's always a battle to try to get everything that you need. But at the same time, I can see that other perspective. I can understand as a general contractor, if you're working on bidding a project and you've got 40 different trades that you have to put together and you get all of the proposals a day or so before bid date, now you have to sift through all massive amount of information and try to make your best choices for the people that are going to do what they what it takes to finish the job. And I'm not saying that like you know, choose the people that are worthy. I don't mean it like that. I mean choose the people that didn't miss anything. And you got to sift through all of that stuff and you got to make choices and you got to present a proposal to the owner. And I mean, we might bid a job and have 2 or 3 subcontractors on it, right? And maybe 4 if it's like some anomaly thing, but for the most part like we have 2 or 3 subs, and trying to get 2 or 3 subcontractors to quote stuff. And man, if we ask for prices from 2 of them for 3, now we got 6 that we're trying to get quotes from. And that so that's where I can kind of start to appreciate the complexity of bidding a job as a GC. And I can also understand that a little bit of when we send them a question and they don't respond, they maybe just don't have time to learn enough to even speak intelligently about what we're asking them, if that makes sense. So Yeah, that's just I don't know, the other side of what I think about. It doesn't come from anybody, right? It's just kind of what I assume, but yeah, that's it. So, we do have I didn't do a good job of talking about this leading up to the meeting in May. But I want to remind everybody, we do have monthly, we call it YFP, right? So Young Fence Professionals. It's a special interest group of AFA. And we have these monthly meetings. Well, I don't personally really care for the name because I don't think that it describes what we're trying to do with the group. And so the group really is just kind of an easy entryway into AFA, right? So if you want to be involved in networking and events and things like that, it's kind of an easy in. And so it doesn't mean that like your age is young. It can be maybe you are young, right? Maybe you're young in your career. Maybe you're young in the fence world. Maybe you're young into the AFA. Maybe you're young into networking. Maybe you're young into events. Like it can be any of that stuff. And it's pretty much an open door, right? Nobody checks the ID when you walk in. So anybody's welcome. It is a pretty cool thing. We meet and we just have an hour long conversation. So last time we talked about AI and we shared a bunch of ideas of how people are using AI. We start off as a big group and then we break up into smaller groups a couple times and come back together. And yeah, just learned a bunch of different ideas about the way that people are using AI and how they've implemented it into their business and what it's doing for them. And I remember one person told us that they used AI in a way that allowed them to create a rendering of a gate at someone's house or at an entrance or something like that. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I never would have even thought to try that. So a lot of a lot of ideas like that were exchanged, and that's kind of the what we do, right? We are going to have here in a few months, we're going to have kind of like a social networking type deal, and so that would be pretty cool, right? Because that's a big part of it. In fact, after the last meeting, I had a guy reach out to me, and he sent me a text message, and he's like, "Hey, I saw you shared your contact information in the meeting. I just wanted to talk to you." And so, we had like an hour and a half long conversation and we talked about life and we talked about religion and we talked about fence and we talked about, his background and my background and like just generic stuff. So it was cool. It was doing the thing that we wanted to do, right? It allowed an easy way for us to network and meet one another. And I think that's really cool. So if you're interested in that, let me know and we'll get you added onto the mailing list. And I personally believe it's worth an hour of your month to sit in there and hear different people's perspectives and things like that. I think that's a thing that we talk about a lot with these events is like the intangible, right? So the networking and the conversations that happen at a table or at a bar or at a fire pit or whatever that may be after the event is actually ended for the day. Those are the intangibles. That's a big deal. And walking away from there with phone numbers and people that you would feel comfortable picking up the phone and calling and asking a question, that's a big deal. Uh, anyway, that's my little spiel about YFP. So if, like I said, if you're interested, reach out, let me know, and we'll get you added onto the mailer list so that you'll get the invites and stuff like that. And there's no commitment. In fact, again, it's an open door policy, right? Anybody who shows up, you're welcome to be in there. It doesn't matter who anything doesn't matter. So come check it out. But past that, I appreciate you all listening. Thanks for hanging out with me. If you have any questions, if you have any advice, if you have any suggestions, let me know. I'm always happy to hear. And we'll see you next time.